My name's Lucas. I'm 24, and I live in the kind of apartment that exists in the margins of a city. On the edge of Denver, the world feels like a low-frequency hum. If I sit still enough, I can't hear the traffic on I-25, a constant, mechanical ocean. It's a sound that reminds you that millions of people are out there living, breathing, and failing, but it's far enough away that I don't have to participate. I'm a freelance coder. I build digital shells for people who actually have things to sell. Yoga studios, coffee shops, boutique bakeries. I give them a home on the internet while I barely have one in the real world. I work in my sweatpants, I drink lukewarm coffee, and I keep my walls high. People are difficult. They're variables I can't control. My last girlfriend, Sarah, told me I was a black box. Input goes in, but nothing comes out. She left after 6 months. I didn't cry. I just went back to my code. Logic is cleaner than emotion. Then there's Jake. Jake is the only person who has a master key to my life. We've been friends since we were 15, which is the only reason I tolerate his chaos. He's a sales guy. He has that Denver tan and a smile that makes you feel like you're the most important person in the room, until he starts trying to sell you something. He called me last Tuesday. I could hear the wind whistling through his car window. Lucas, pack a bag, man. We're going to Aspen. I groaned, leaning back in my Herman Miller chair. Jake, I have a deadline for a Pilates studio in Boulder. I can't. The Pilates studio can wait, he barked. My treat. My mom's coming, too. I don't know, man. She's been in a mood. She needs a win. I need a win. It'll be a family vibe. Just 3 days. I looked at my apartment. The stack of delivery boxes by the door. The flickering light in the hallway. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of claustrophobia. Aspen? I asked. The lodge is incredible, Lucas. Snow, fire, expensive bourbon. Don't be a ghost. Come live for once. I didn't say yes because I wanted to ski. I said yes because Jake has this way of making you feel like your life is a stagnant pond, and he's the only one offering a current. I packed my thermals, layers of wool I hadn't touched in years, and my laptop, just in case. I didn't think about Elena then. Not really. To me, she was just Jake's mom. The woman who used to drive us to soccer practice in a beat-up Jeep with a Leica camera sitting on the dashboard like a loaded weapon. I didn't know that by the end of this trip, the family vibe would be dead, and I'd be the one holding the ashes. We hit the road in Jake's SUV, the heater blasting high enough to dry out my retinas. Jake was a whirlpool of energy, talking about sales quotas and some girl he met on an app. Elena sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blurred white of the Rockies. She looked like a statue carved from something harder than marble. Elena is 44, but age isn't a number with her, it's a weight. Jake told me once she used to be a war photographer. She'd spent her 20s in places where the sky stayed gray from smoke, not clouds. She had these deep green eyes, the kind of green you only see in old forests or stagnant water. They didn't just look at you, they audited you. You're quiet back there, Lucas, she said, her voice cutting through Jake's monologue. I caught her eyes in the rearview mirror. Just thinking about work, I lied. You think too much about things that aren't real, she replied, then turned back to the window. Jake laughed it off, but I felt a chill that the SUV's heater couldn't touch. We arrived at the lodge on a Friday afternoon. It was the kind of place that smells like money and cedar. A sprawling timber structure nestled near the base of a private slope. Jake's crew, 3 guys from his office and a girl who looked like she'd been born in a ski suit, were already there, cracking beers and making a ruckus. I felt that familiar itch in my skin, the urge to find a corner and disappear. I grabbed my bag and headed for the room, but I stopped when I saw Elena. She was standing on the back deck, away from the noise. She was wearing a bright red scarf. It was the only bit of color in a world of white and brown. She wasn't looking at the slopes. She was looking at the tree line, where the forest got thick and the shadows turned blue. It's beautiful, isn't it? I asked, stepping out onto the deck. She didn't look at me. It's a lie, Lucas. This place. It's a curated version of nature. It's designed to make you feel safe while you're standing on the edge of something that could kill you in 20 minutes. She finally turned to me. Her face was framed by the red wool, her skin pale and tight. Jake thinks this trip is for me. He thinks if he brings me to a pretty place, the things I've seen will just evaporate. Does it work? I asked. A small, sharp smile touched her lips. I've spent half my life waiting for a storm that never ends. Aspen is too sunny for me. That night, the lodge was a mess of loud music and tequila shots. Jake was the center of it all, performing for his friends. I sat on the periphery, watching Elena. She sat in a leather wingback chair, a book in her lap that she wasn't reading. She looked at the group with a mixture of pity and boredom. At one point, our eyes met across the room. She didn't look away. She didn't smile. She just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a signal from one ghost to another. We were the only two people in that room who weren't pretending to have fun. I went to bed early, the sound of Jake's laughter echoing through the floorboards. I dreamt of a red scarf fluttering in a white void. Saturday morning arrived with a headache. Jake and his crew were already geared up by 8 a.m., high on caffeine and adrenaline. They were heading for the backcountry, the unpatrolled, rugged trails that promised a rush. "Come on, Lucas," Jake urged, slapping my shoulder. "Fresh powder. It'll clear the cobwebs out of your head." I looked at the mountain. It looked like a wall. "I'll pass, man. My legs are still in Denver." Jake rolled his eyes, a flicker of genuine annoyance crossing his face. He hated it when people didn't follow his script. "Whatever. Mom, you coming? We can hit the blue runs." Elena was at the kitchen island, staring into a mug of black coffee. "I'm not in the mood for gravity today, Jake. I think I'll just walk. The lower trails look peaceful." Jake sighed, adjusted his goggles, and headed out with a loud, "Your loss." The door slammed, and the lodge fell into a heavy, artificial silence. I sat on the couch, pretending to be busy with a line of code on my laptop. I could feel Elena's presence behind me. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. "The light is wrong today," she said suddenly. I looked up. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, her red scarf draped over her arm like a wounded bird. "What do you mean? It's too flat. No shadows. In the desert, that meant a sandstorm. Here, it means the sky is about to fall." She turned to me, her green eyes piercing. "Want to see it happen?" It wasn't a friendly invitation. It was a challenge. "Sure," I said, closing my laptop. We headed out to the Pine Creek Trail, a loop that stayed relatively close to the lodge. At first, it was easy. The air was crisp, and the silence of the woods was a relief after Jake's constant noise. We talked about small things, my work, her editing job. But she wasn't really there. She was walking with a strange, purposeful speed, pushing deeper into the trees. "We're getting pretty far out," I noted, checking my watch. "Are you afraid of the woods, Lucas?" she asked, not slowing down. "I'm afraid of being stupid in the woods," I countered. She stopped and turned. The wind had picked up, a low whistle through the pines. A single flake of snow landed on her cheek. "Most people spend their whole lives being smart. They stay in the lines. They stay in the light. And then they die having never seen what they're actually made of." Before I could respond, the sky simply vanished. It didn't start with a few flakes. It started with a roar. A wall of white slammed into us, erasing the trail, the trees, and the horizon in a matter of seconds. The flat light she had mentioned was now a total whiteout. "Elena," I shouted, the wind catching the name and tearing it away. I reached out and grabbed her arm. Her coat was already slick with frost. I pulled out my phone. The screen flickered, 10% battery. No service. The cold was already murdering the lithium. "We need to turn back. Now." I yelled over the howl. She looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't look like Jake's mom. She looked exhilarated. "The trail is gone, Lucas. There is no back anymore." Survival is not a cinematic montage. It is a series of clumsy, agonizing movements. My lungs felt like they were being scraped with steel wool. Every breath was a gamble. I kept my hand locked on Elena's sleeve, terrified that if I let go, she would simply dissolve into the white. The markers. I saw one. I screamed, but it was just a shadow, a trick of the optic nerve. We were drifting. My boots were filling with powder, and my thighs burned with the effort of post-holing through drifts that reached my knees. Elena stumbled. I caught her, pulling her upright, her body surprisingly light against mine. Her face was a mask of frost, her eyelashes white with ice. "Lucas," she gasped, her voice barely audible. "Stop. You're walking us into a drainage." I looked down. The ground was sloping sharply. If we went down into a ravine in this weather, we were dead. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A final, pathetic vibration, and then died. The silence of the dead technology felt like a death sentence. Where? I asked, my voice cracking. Where do we go? She didn't answer with words. She pointed. Through a momentary rift in the snow, a dark shape appeared. It wasn't a tree. It had a sharp, unnatural angle. A roof. We lunged toward it. It was a weathered, one-room trapper's cabin, half buried in a drift. I threw my shoulder against the door. It didn't budge. I hit it again, screaming with a sudden, primal rage at the cold. The rusted latch snapped, and we tumbled inside, bringing a cloud of snow with us. I slammed the door shut and dropped the wooden bar. The silence was deafening. The wind was still there, but it was a muffled beast outside the walls. It was pitch black, smelling of ancient dust, dry rot, and pine resin. I heard Elena collapse onto a wooden bench, her breathing ragged and wet. Elena? Talk to me. I'm here, she whispered. I could hear her teeth chattering, a rhythmic, violent clicking. I fumbled in the dark until I found my lighter. A small, orange flicker bloomed in the gloom. The cabin was tiny. A rusted wood stove sat in the corner like a sleeping iron god. Next to it, a miracle, a small stack of cedar kindling and a pile of old, moth-eaten wool blankets. We need a fire, I said, my fingers shaking so hard I nearly dropped the lighter. Now. I knelt by the stove. It took 3 tries to get the dry bark to catch. When the first flame took hold, the light hit Elena. She was huddled on the bench, her red scarf now a dark, sodden mess around her neck. She looked small. For years, I had seen her as this looming, untouchable figure of authority. Now, she was just a shivering woman in a forgotten shack. I grabbed the blankets and moved toward her. Take off the coat, I commanded. It's wet. It'll pull the heat out of you. She looked at me, her eyes wide and glazed with the early stages of hypothermia. She didn't move. I didn't wait for permission. I began unzipping her jacket, my numb fingers fumbling with the slider. As the layers came off, the space between us felt different. The air in the cabin was starting to warm, but the real heat was the sudden, sharp proximity of another human being in a world that had tried to freeze us solid. The fire was roaring now, a hungry, living thing that demanded more wood. I fed it a heavy log I found in the corner and sat back on the floor, the heat hitting my face like a physical blow. Elena was wrapped in 3 layers of moth-eaten wool, her back against the wall. The color was returning to her cheeks, but her eyes remained fixed on the dancing flames. I used to have a dream about this, she said suddenly. Her voice was different, lower, stripped of the polite, mom veneer. Not a cabin. A cellar. In Sarajevo. 1994. I looked at her, leaning against the bench. Jake told me you were a war photographer. He makes it sound like an adventure story. Elena let out a dry, hacking laugh that turned into a cough. Jake sees the world in Technicolor. He thinks I was a hero with a camera. He doesn't understand that a camera is just a way to watch people die without feeling responsible for it. She reached into the folds of the blanket and pulled out her hands. They were steady now. I spent 10 years looking through a viewfinder. I saw a man in a suit holding his daughter's hand while they ran across a bridge, and I saw a sniper take them both out with 1 bullet. You know what I did, Lucas? I adjusted my f-stop. I checked the light. I took the picture. The wind slammed against the cabin, a reminder that the world outside was still trying to get in. You were doing your job, I said, though it sounded hollow even to me. Was I? She asked, finally looking at me. Or was I hiding? Just like you hide behind your code. You build websites because you don't want to deal with the messy, unpredictable reality of people. I took photos because I didn't want to be part of the tragedy. I wanted to be the observer. She shifted, moving from the bench to the floor, sitting directly across from me. The heat from the stove was intense now, making the air thick. She reached out and touched the sleeve of my thermal shirt. When Jake's father died, he didn't die in glory. He died in a hospital bed from an infection that shouldn't have killed him. And I sat there, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have a camera. I had to just be there. I hated it. I've been running from that feeling ever since. She leaned in closer. I could smell the wood smoke on her skin, and something else, the faint, lingering scent of her perfume mixed with the metallic tang of the storm. Tonight, out there in the white, I realized I've been waiting to get lost for a long time, Lucas. I wanted the world to stop making sense. I wanted to see if I was still alive under all the motherhood and the editing and the quiet life. I felt a strange, magnetic pull. It was dangerous. This was Jake's mother. This was a woman 20 years my senior. But in this cabin, those labels were dissolving. We weren't a coder and a mom. We were two animals in a cave, shivering against the end of the world. "I see you, Elena," I whispered. It was the truest thing I'd ever said. Her breath hitched. She didn't pull away. Instead, she moved closer until our knees were touching. "No one has seen me in a decade, Lucas. They only see what I can do for them." The fire popped, a spark jumping behind the glass door of the stove. The tension in the room was no longer about survival. It was about the terrifying realization that we were no longer strangers, and we were no longer safe. The air in the cabin had grown heavy, charged with a static that had nothing to do with the blizzard. Elena's hand was still on my arm, her touch burning through the wool. We were suspended in a moment where the old world, the world of Denver, of Jake, of social norms, had simply ceased to exist. "I'm tired of being a ghost, Lucas," she whispered. I didn't think. I couldn't. I leaned forward, and the distance between us evaporated. The kiss didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like a collision. It was desperate and tasted of salt and wood smoke. It was the shared madness she had hinted at, a frantic attempt to prove that we weren't just shadows in a dying world. In that small, frozen shack, she wasn't a mother, and I wasn't a loner. We were just two people refusing to be cold anymore. But then, as I moved to adjust my weight, my boot caught on a loose floorboard near the stove. It creaked, a hollow, unnatural sound. "Wait," I breathed, pulling back. The spell didn't break, but it shifted. Underneath the loose plank, I saw a glint of metal. I reached down, my fingers brushing against cold steel and leather. I pulled. A heavy, weather-beaten satchel emerged from the dust of decades. "What is that?" Elena asked, her voice trembling slightly. I cleared the grime from the bag. It wasn't a trapper's kit. Inside were three things: a thick, leather-bound journal, a rusted but functional 1911 pistol, and a stack of weathered envelopes tied with a black ribbon. I opened the journal. The entries were dated from the late 90s. The handwriting was frantic, sprawling. As I flipped through, a name jumped out. Vance. Elena turned pale. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the leather. Vance, he was a guide. He disappeared in these mountains 20 years ago. They said he fell into a crevasse. People called him a local legend, a man who knew the high country better than anyone. I read a line aloud. The ink faded but legible. "They think I'm dead. Let them. The only way to survive the world is to let it burn while you watch from the peaks." Elena looked at the pistol, then back at me. The romantic haze of the last hour was suddenly pierced by a cold, sharp reality. This cabin wasn't just a shelter. It was a tomb for a man who had chosen to vanish. "He didn't fall," Elena whispered, her green eyes wide. "He stayed here. He chose the silence." She looked at the pistol, then at the door where the wind was still screaming. "He was like me, Lucas. He saw too much, and he decided to stop participating." The discovery felt like an omen. We weren't just two people who got lost. We were standing in the footprint of a man who had made getting lost his entire life. Elena took the journal from my hands, clutching it to her chest like it was a holy relic. "Do you think he's still out there?" I asked, looking at the dark corners of the small room. "I think he's everywhere," she replied. She looked at me, and the intensity in her gaze was frightening. "Lucas, if we get out of here, if the world finds us, we can't tell them about this. We can't tell them about him. And we can't tell them about us." She was asking for a pact, not just to hide a kiss, but to protect a secret that felt heavier than the storm itself. I woke up to the sound of silence. The fire was a heap of glowing orange eyes in the dark, and the air was so cold I could see my breath in the dim light. Elena was still pressed against me, her head on my shoulder, but her eyes were open. She was staring at the ceiling. The journal and the pistol were back in their hiding spot under the floorboards. We had buried them again at 3 in the morning, a silent agreement to leave Vance's ghost alone. "It's over," she whispered. She didn't sound relieved. She sounded like someone waking up from a dream they weren't ready to leave. Then we heard it, a rhythmic, mechanical thumping that vibrated through the floor. A helicopter. Then distant shouts. Voices calling our names. Voices that belonged to a world that didn't know who we were anymore. Elena sat up instantly. I watched as her face shifted. The vulnerability, the raw hunger for life I'd seen in the firelight, it all vanished. She straightened her clothes, smoothed her hair, and wrapped the red scarf tightly around her neck. In 30 seconds, the woman who had kissed me with the desperation of a dying soldier was gone. In her place stood the composed, untouchable Elena. "Remember," she said, looking at the door, not at me. "We got lost. We found the cabin. We waited. That is the story." I stood up, my joints screaming. "Elena, don't!" "Lucas," she snapped, and for a second, the green ice was back in her eyes. "There is no us in the light." I kicked the door open. The sudden glare of the sun on the fresh snow was blinding. 2 rangers in neon orange were trudging toward us, and behind them, a figure was sprinting, stumbling through the drifts. "Jake." He reached us first, his face a mess of tears and snot. He threw his arms around Elena, burying his face in her shoulder. "Mom. Oh God, Mom. I thought I'd lost you. I thought you were gone." Elena held him, patting his back with a mechanical, practiced grace. "I'm okay, Jake. Lucas found the cabin. He kept the fire going. He's the reason I'm here." Jake turned to me, his eyes wet with a gratitude that felt like a punch to the gut. He grabbed my hand, shaking it with a frantic energy. "Lucas, man, I don't even have words. You're a hero. You saved my family." I looked past him to Elena. She was watching me over Jake's shoulder. Her expression was perfectly blank, the look of a photographer capturing a scene she had no part in. "I just did what I had to do, Jake," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. The Rangers bundled us into the helicopter. They wrapped us in those crinkly, silver thermal blankets. As we lifted off, I looked down at the cabin. It was a tiny, dark speck in a sea of perfect, indifferent white. I realized then that I wasn't leaving the danger behind. I was carrying it back with me to Denver, hidden under my skin. Part 8. The Ghost of Denver. Estimated. 550 words. Scene: Lucas's apartment, Denver. The lighting is cold, artificial. The hum of the city is louder than before, grating and intrusive. Coming back to Denver felt like waking up in a room where all the furniture had been moved 2 inches to the left. Everything looked the same, but I kept tripping over the reality of it. I sat at my desk, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating the stale coffee cups and the dust motes dancing in the air. I tried to code. I tried to lose myself in the elegant logic of Python and JavaScript, but the characters on the screen looked like dead insects. Every time I closed my eyes, I wasn't in my apartment. I was back in the cabin, feeling the heat of the wood stove and the terrifying weight of Elena's gaze. I texted her 3 days after we got back. "Are you okay?" No reply. I waited a week and tried again. I can't stop thinking about what we found. About Vance. About everything. Silence. The blue bubbles of my messages sat there like digital headstones. I realized then that Elena wasn't just ghosting me. She was erasing the version of herself that existed in the storm. She had crawled back into her skin, back into the role of the suburban editor and the grieving widow, and she had locked the door behind her. She had used me as a bridge to survive the night, and then she had burned the bridge behind her. Jake, on the other hand, was everywhere. He kept calling, inviting me to dinners, to bars, to celebrate being alive. He treated me like a sacred object. To him, I was the man who had saved his mother. It was a sickening irony. Every time he clapped me on the back or bought me a drink, I felt the phantom heat of Elena's lips on mine. I felt like a traitor, not just to my friend, but to the truth. "You're different, man," Jake said one night at a dive bar in Lodo. He was 3 beers in, his face flushed. "You've got this look in your eyes, like you're still up there on the mountain." "I think a part of me is," I muttered, staring into my glass. "Well, Mom's the same way," Jake said, shaking his head. "She's been quiet. Even for her. She spends all day in her darkroom. She hasn't touched a digital camera since we got back. She's gone back to film. Says she needs to see the chemicals work. Needs to know it's real." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Does she talk about it? The cabin?" Jake laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. "She won't even say the word Aspen. It's like she's deleted the whole weekend. But she's been working on one specific project. She won't let me see it. Typical artist shit, right?" I went home that night and sat in the dark. I realized that the closed-off version of myself that Sarah had hated was gone. I wasn't a black box anymore. I was an open wound. I had tasted something raw and dangerous, a connection born of life and death, and the sterile safety of my coder life felt like a slow-motion suicide. I started researching Vance. I spent hours on deep web forums and archived local newspapers from the 90s. The legend was consistent. A man who knew too much, who saw a darkness in the mountains and decided to walk into it. But there was one detail I hadn't known. Vance hadn't disappeared alone. He had been a source for a journalist, a photographer who was working on a story about land corruption in the Rockies. The photographer's name wasn't listed in the archives, but I knew. I knew why Elena had found that cabin so easily. I knew why she had known exactly where the loose floorboard was. She hadn't just been lost with me. She had been taking me to her past. The realization that Elena hadn't stumbled upon the cabin by accident sat in my gut like a lead weight. It changed the architecture of my memory. Every touch, every confession, every shudder in the dark. Was it a calculation? Or was it something more tragic? A woman trying to return to the only place she ever felt real, using a boy who looked enough like a stranger to be safe? I couldn't stay in my apartment anymore. The code on my screen felt like a cage. I drove to her house on a Tuesday night. Jake's car wasn't in the driveway. He was at a basketball game in Boulder. He'd texted me earlier to join, and I'd ignored it. I walked up to the front door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't knock. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. The house smelled of lemon polish and silence. It was the smell of a life lived in the waiting room. I followed a faint, acidic scent toward the back of the house, the smell of developer and fixer. The darkroom. I found her in the basement. The room was bathed in a deep, blood-red light. Elena was standing over a chemical bath, moving a piece of photographic paper with a pair of tongs. She didn't look up when I entered. She didn't seem surprised. "The air is different in here, isn't it, Lucas?" she said, her voice cool and steady. "Things take time to appear. You can't just hit a button and see the result. You have to wait for the shadow to become a shape." "You knew where the cabin was," I said, skipping the pleasantries. My voice sounded jagged in the small space. "You didn't lead us to safety. You led us to Vance's grave." She finally looked at me. In the red light, her eyes looked black, two bottomless pits of ink. "Vance wasn't just a legend, Lucas. He was the man who taught me that the world is a burning building and the only honest thing to do is watch it fall." I was 22. I was younger than you are now. We had a summer in that cabin that felt like a century. She lifted the paper from the tray and clipped it to a wire to dry. I looked at the wall behind her. It was covered in prints. Dozens of them. All from our night in the storm. But they weren't what I expected. They weren't mom photos. They were haunting, grainy shots of me. Me shivering by the stove. Me sleeping with my jaw tight. Me looking at her with a hunger I didn't know I possessed. And then, there were the shots of the red scarf, caught in the thorns of a pine tree, looking like a splash of blood in the snow. "You were documenting me," I whispered, a cold realization washing over me. "Even then, even when we were dying, you were just adjusting your f-stop." "No," she said, stepping closer. The smell of the chemicals was overwhelming now. "I was trying to see if I was still there. I used you as a mirror, Lucas. I wanted to see if a woman like me could still break a man like you. And I wanted to see if I could still feel the burn of a secret." She reached out, her fingers stained with developer, and traced the line of my jaw. "Jake thinks I'm his mother. The world thinks I'm a widow. But you know the monster in the red scarf. And that makes you the most dangerous thing in my life. Why did you leave the scarf on the mountain?" I asked, thinking of the photo Jake had shown me. She smiled, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. "Because the woman who wore it didn't come back, Lucas. She stayed in the cabin. The person standing in front of you now is just a developer. I'm just finishing the print." I looked at the photos of myself. I looked like a ghost. I realized then that she hadn't saved me. She had photographed my soul and kept it in a basement in Denver. End of part 9. I didn't see Elena again after that night in the darkroom. I didn't try to call. I didn't try to text. I understood the rules now. She had finished the print, and once the image is fixed, the light can't change it anymore. I went back to my apartment and tried to be the old Lucas, the coder, the observer, the black box. But the silence of my room felt like a scream. The phone rang at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was Jake. His voice wasn't high energy this time. It was flat, broken, the sound of a man who had finally hit the bottom of the well. "She's gone, Lucas," he whispered. What do you mean, gone? Did she go to the store? I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. Her car is in the driveway. Her phone is on the kitchen island. But she's gone. Her darkroom, it's empty. All the photos, all the negatives, she burned them in the fireplace. There's nothing left but ash. I drove to the house. The police were already there, their blue and red lights pulsing against the suburban brick like a panicked heartbeat. Jake was sitting on the curb, his head in his hands. He looked small. I sat next to him, putting an arm around his shoulder, playing the part of the best friend one last time. She didn't leave a note? I asked. Nothing, Jake sobbed. Just, she left a frame on the wall in the living room. That photo of the red scarf in the forest. Remember? You said you liked it. I walked into the house. The air still smelled of burnt paper and chemicals. I stood in front of the photo. It was a beautiful, haunting image. The bright red wool snagged on a black branch, surrounded by an endless, suffocating white. To anyone else, it was a piece of art about survival. To me, it was a map. I looked closer. In the bottom right corner, where a photographer usually signs their name, there were no letters. Instead, there were 8 tiny digits etched into the frame itself, hidden under the lip of the wood. 39, 1911, -106, 8175, GPS coordinates. I knew where they led. They didn't lead to a trail or a lodge. They led back to the drainage, back to the weathered shack where Vance had hidden from the world. She hadn't gone there to die. She had gone there to stop being a ghost and start being a shadow. She had gone to the only place where the mask wasn't required. Did you find anything? A detective asked, stepping up behind me. He was an older man with tired eyes, looking for a simple explanation for a complicated woman. I looked at the coordinates. I looked at the photo of the scarf, the signal she had left for the only person who truly saw her. I thought about the journal and the pistol under the floorboards. I thought about Jake, who would spend the rest of his life looking for a mother who never really existed. And then, I thought about the cabin. I thought about the firelight and the way she had looked at me when the world was ending. No, I said, my voice steady, my black box finally closing for good. I don't see anything. I think she just got tired of the light. I walked out of the house and drove away. I didn't go to the police station, and I didn't go back to my apartment. I drove toward the mountains. I didn't know if I was going to find her, or if I was going to find Vance, or if I was just going to walk until the snow swallowed me, too. But as I hit the I-70, headed west toward the peaks, I felt a strange, terrifying peace. The hum of the city was gone. There was only the wind, the whiteout, and the secret we had made out of the storm.